A young American woman from a rural town, pregnant and facing a devastating diagnosis for her baby, received a blessing from Pope Francis during a desperate pilgrimage. What happened next left doctors perplexed and the faithful amazed. A journey between science and faith, where the impossible became reality. This story of a modern miracle will change your perspective on hope. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share a faith experience that transformed your life in the comments below. The sun punished the dry land, creating deep cracks that looked like ancient scars on the red soil. Among the withered trees on the small farm, Sarah bent with difficulty, her 5-month belly already drawing a prominent curve under her simple dress. Her rough fingers, marked by years of work, stroked the twisted trunk of the oldest tree in the orchard. "We're drying up together, old friend," she whispered, as a solitary tear traced a path down her sunburnt face. The sky over this rural corner of the South, dry as dust, hadn't shed a drop in nearly 7 months. The worst drought in 50 years, the town elders said. But it wasn't just the lack of rain that tormented the heart of the 28-year-old woman. There was a deeper, more painful drought that no ordinary rain could remedy. The words of the doctor from the nearest city still echoed in her mind like a relentless hammer. Severe congenital anomaly. Very little chance of survival. Prepare for the worst, ma'am. The tiny life growing inside her, the last memory of Joseph, her husband taken by an accident during the harvest last fall, was fighting a fate that seemed already sealed by the medical experts. The village of Willow Creek was too small to have a proper hospital. The local clinic, run by Dr. Miller, a man in his 70s, barely handled flu cases and minor injuries. It was he who first noticed something wasn't right during the routine checkup, and who insisted Sarah travel to the nearest city for a specialized consultation. "Sarah, you shouldn't be out in this sun." The voice of Mrs. Gable, her nearest neighbor, and one of the few people who hadn't abandoned the community for the big cities, cut through the afternoon silence. "In your condition, working like this could be bad for the baby." Sarah straightened slowly, hands on her lower back. The weight of the pregnancy, combined with the worries she carried, seemed to double the force of gravity on her thin shoulders. "If I don't tend to the trees, no one will, Mrs. Gable. And if there's no harvest this year, what will my son and I live on?" she answered, with a simplicity that carried the wisdom of those who learned early that life offers no easy choices. Mrs. Gable approached, carrying a small basket covered with an embroidered cloth. The smell of fresh bread and homemade cheese filled Sarah's nostrils, reminding her stomach she had skipped lunch. "I brought something for you to eat. And also," the old woman's voice dropped as she looked around, as if afraid the very trees might hear, "I brought the tea my grandmother used to make for women expecting babies with difficulties. Herbs from the hills, maybe some mugwort, and something else only the elders know." Sarah accepted the gift with a tired smile. She knew some older neighbors tried to help her with their ancestral remedies, while others kept their distance, as if her complicated pregnancy was a bad omen for a community already hit hard by the drought. In that small rural universe, superstitions still shared space with Catholic faith, a mix that had always existed in the remote villages of this region. "Thank you, Mrs. Gable. I'll drink the tea, but I'll also keep praying. Father Thomas says we should trust the medicine God gave us, but also the power of prayer." The mention of the old village priest made Mrs. Gable sigh. Father Thomas had served that community for over 4 decades. He had baptized Sarah, married her and Joseph, and now accompanied her struggle to bring a healthy child into the world. The priest, well into his 80s, carried in his time-faded blue eyes the weight of many stories, some of hope, others of disappointment. "Speaking of him, Father Thomas asked you to stop by the church today. Said he has something important to tell you," Mrs. Gable commented, adjusting her shawl over her bony shoulders. The sun was beginning its descent when Sarah entered the small stone church. The cool interior was an immediate relief for her overheated body. The thick walls, built centuries ago, kept the space protected from the relentless heat outside. Only a few candles lit the altar, casting dancing shadows on the carved saints. Father Thomas sat in the first pew, his wrinkled hands idly flipping through an old breviary. Hearing Sarah's steps echoing on the stone floor, he looked up and smiled, revealing the genuine affection he held for this parishioner he saw as a daughter. "Sarah, my daughter, I'm glad you came." The priest's voice, still strong despite his advanced age, resonated in the sacred space. "Sit here. I have some news that might be important for you." She obeyed, feeling the relief of taking the weight off her legs. The baby moved in her womb as if also curious about what the old priest had to say. A message arrived from the diocese. The Holy Father will be making a special visit to St. Jude's Shrine on Prayer Mountain in 3 weeks. The priest's eyes shone with renewed intensity. It's the first time in many years a pope has visited the shrine. They're calling it a pilgrimage for peace and the health of families. Sarah's heart quickened, and she instinctively placed a hand on her belly. Prayer Mountain was just over 60 miles away, a considerable distance for a woman in her condition, but not impossible. "Do you think that I should go?" she asked, a spark of hope igniting in her chest. The priest hesitated, and in that hesitation, his internal conflict was revealed. As a man of faith, he believed in the power of divine intercession, in the miracles that saints and the Vicar of Christ on earth could provide. As a man who had lived long enough to see many prayers go unanswered, he feared fueling false hopes. "Sarah, you know I can't promise miracles. I've seen many people make pilgrimages for cures that never came." His voice trembled slightly. "But I've also seen faith move mountains in unexpected ways. If your heart tells you to go, perhaps you should listen." That night, lying in her simple bed in the house she had inherited from her parents, Sarah contemplated the ceiling while stroking her belly. Moonlight streamed in through the curtainless window, casting mysterious shadows in the room. The baby stirred, as if talking to her through small kicks and punches. "What do you think, little one? Should we make this journey together?" she whispered to her womb. "Your grandma always said God's ways are mysterious. Maybe this is one of them." She then remembered an old family tradition, told by her grandma on winter nights around the wood-burning stove. The women of her lineage, since time immemorial, had made pilgrimages in moments of extreme need, for an abundant harvest during a drought, for a husband who would return safe from war, for a child who would survive a deadly illness. The next morning, her decision was made. She would go to Prayer Mountain, not by bus or by hitching a ride, but on foot as tradition demanded. A true pilgrimage, a physical sacrifice as a manifestation of her unwavering faith. She knew many would consider her crazy, a pregnant woman, with a high-risk pregnancy, walking for days under the scorching summer sun. News travels fast in small towns. Soon all of Willow Creek was talking about Sarah's decision. Opinions were divided, as always happens when faith manifests in ways that challenge common logic. "It's madness. She'll kill the baby and herself on that journey," said Mrs. Henderson, known for her chronic pessimism, while buying bread at the village's only bakery. "Faith moves mountains. If Our Lady guides her steps, she'll arrive safely," countered the baker, a man of simple but deep faith as he kneaded the next day's dough. At the village clinic, Dr. Miller shook his head with concern. As a doctor, he saw only the risks of the undertaking. As a man born and raised in that land of ancient traditions, he understood the calling Sarah felt. "At least take some medicine, plenty of water, and rest often," he advised when she came to say goodbye. "And promise you'll accept help along the way. It's not weakness, Sarah. Even Jesus had a Cyrenean to help carry the cross." Father Thomas celebrated a special mass on the eve of her departure. The small church, usually empty except on Sundays, was surprisingly full. Even those who disapproved of the pilgrimage came, perhaps to witness the beginning of a story that, regardless of the outcome, would be told for generations. During communion, when Sarah knelt before the altar to receive the body of Christ, a deep silence fell over the place. The priest, with tears in his eyes, did something unusual. After giving her the host, he placed his hand on her head and uttered an ancient blessing in Latin, which few there understood, but all felt the weight of its words. Dawn had not yet given way to daybreak when Sarah began her journey. She carried only a small backpack with water, bread, some olives from her farm, a few medicines, and a rosary that had belonged to her grandmother. She wore simple clothes, sturdy sandals, and covered her head with a scarf to protect herself from the sun. The first stage of the walk would be the easiest. She knew every stone, every curve of the path that wound between the farms of the region. The twisted trees, silent witnesses to hundreds of years of human history, seemed to bow slightly in her direction, as if greeting her. As the sun rose on the horizon, the heat intensified. The landscape became more arid, with stony hills covered in scrub adapted to the drought. The smell of wild thyme and maybe some sage filled the air, mixing with the sweat that was already beginning to bead on her forehead. Around midday, when the sun was directly overhead, Sarah found an old hermitage partially in ruins. It was one of those small rural sanctuaries built centuries ago, likely by hermit monks seeking solitude for contemplation. The roof had partially collapsed, but one area remained covered, offering precious shade. She sat on the stone floor, relieved by the coolness. As she chewed a piece of bread with olives, her eyes scanned the time-worn walls. It was then she noticed, carved into the stone, a symbol that was strangely familiar, a kind of interlacing of lines that formed a stylized flower. Her heart quickened as she recognized the same motif her grandma had embroidered on all the family linens. She had never questioned the origin of that design, accepting it as part of family traditions. Now, seeing it carved into that century-old wall, she understood she was following a path walked by generations of women in her lineage. "I'm on the right path," she murmured to herself, feeling a renewal of strength that transcended the physical. When she resumed her journey, her steps felt lighter, despite the heat and the weight of the pregnancy. The pains in her back and the swelling in her feet were offered up as part of her devotion, transforming the suffering into silent prayer. As evening approached, she spotted a small shepherd's farm in the distance. The smoke rising from the rustic chimney promised shelter and perhaps some warm food. She approached hesitantly, aware that not everyone looked favorably on a woman traveling alone, especially in her condition. She was greeted by the barking of sheepdogs, quickly silenced by the firm voice of a middle-aged woman who appeared at the door of the stone house. Her face, marked by outdoor work, softened as she saw Sarah's belly. "Blessed Mother, a pregnant woman alone out here. Come in quickly," exclaimed the shepherd's wife, gesturing energetically. "Matthew, get some hot water ready for our guest to wash her feet. Lucia, set another plate." The shepherd family lived isolated in the hills, keeping traditions that dated back centuries. In their simplicity, they offered everything they had: a modest dinner of vegetable soup and homemade cheese, an improvised bed with fresh hay covered by clean sheets, and stories around the fire. The patriarch, a man of few words and many wrinkles, narrated how his ancestors had survived wars, plagues, and famines thanks to the protection of the saints to whom they were devoted. His wife, Rosa, shared stories of miraculous cures attributed to pilgrimages similar to the one Sarah was undertaking. It was Lucia, the couple's eldest daughter, a 17-year-old with eyes that burned with curiosity about the world beyond the hills, who was most interested in Sarah's journey. "You're really going to see the Pope?" she asked, her voice filled with admiration. "They say he has the power to heal with just a touch. I don't know if I'll get that close or if he'll notice a simple woman like me among thousands of the faithful," Sarah answered with honesty. "But I believe just being in his presence, breathing the same air, will be a blessing." That night, while everyone was asleep, Lucia sought out Sarah. Her young face reflected the moonlight that streamed through the small window of the barn. "I want to go with you," she announced in a determined whisper. "Not just to Prayer Mountain, but beyond, to the world. This is my chance to get out of this isolation." Sarah saw in the young woman's eyes the same longing she had felt in her own youth, the desire for wider horizons, for experiences beyond the limits of rural life. Unlike Lucia, however, she had chosen to stay for love of the land, for Joseph, for the traditions. "Would your parents allow it?" she questioned, though she already suspected the answer. "They don't need to know until we're too far away. Then, I'll send a letter." Sarah sat up on the improvised bed, feeling the weight of responsibility. She couldn't encourage a young woman to abandon her family, but she also understood the suffocation that an isolated life in the hills could cause. "Lucia, I can't take you without your parents' blessing, but I can talk to them. Explain that you could help me on the journey and then return." She paused, measuring her words. Sometimes, seeing the world beyond the hills for a few days can be enough to value what you have at home, or to confirm that your destiny truly lies beyond. To her surprise, the next morning, after a frank conversation with Lucia's parents, they granted permission for their daughter to accompany Sarah, not just as an act of kindness toward the pregnant pilgrim, but also as a recognition that the young woman needed to expand her horizons. "Bring our daughter back with stories to tell, but with her heart still tied to these hills," asked Rosa as she prepared provisions for their journey. With a companion for the journey, the path became less lonely. Lucia knew shortcuts through the hills, trails used only by shepherds and longtime pilgrims. Her youthful enthusiasm was contagious, making Sarah temporarily forget her physical pains and worries about the future. On the third day of walking, they faced their first major obstacle. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon with frightening speed, turning afternoon into premature night. Soon the storm broke over them, an unexpected downpour after months of merciless drought. "We need to find shelter," Lucia shouted over the roar of the thunder. "This valley could flood in minutes." Through the curtain of rain, Sarah spotted what looked like another ancient structure, perhaps an abandoned chapel or a rest stop for pilgrims from ages past. With difficulty, the two women climbed the slippery slope to reach the shelter. It was indeed an old chapel, now almost completely in ruins. Only one corner still had an intact roof, enough to protect them from the fury of the elements. Soaked and trembling from the cold, they gathered relatively dry twigs from inside the chapel, and with the skill that only rural life teaches, Lucia managed to light a small fire. "It's strange, isn't it?" commented the young woman as they tried to dry their clothes by the modest flame. "Months without a drop of water, and now this storm, as if the sky is crying all the tears it's held back." Sarah didn't answer immediately. She watched the chapel walls, where the flickering firelight revealed faded frescoes of saints and angels. In one of them, she noticed the figure of a pregnant woman being blessed by an angel. The Annunciation, probably. But there was something peculiar in the way the scene was represented. "Lucia, look at this," she called, approaching the wall. "This painting. The Virgin seems to be on a pilgrimage. See the sandals, the travel staff?" The young woman approached, curious. "That's true. I've never seen an Annunciation like this. Usually Mary is at home, not on a road." A silent revelation settled in Sarah's heart. How many women across the centuries had made journeys similar to hers? How many had carried in their wombs hope, faith, love for unborn children, for whom they would make any sacrifice? The rain continued throughout the night, but inside those ancient walls by the humble fire, the two women found not just physical shelter, but also a sense of historical continuity, of belonging to a lineage of faith and female perseverance that transcended time. The next morning, the world seemed reborn. The rain had given way to a sky of an almost painfully perfect blue. The vegetation, previously withered, displayed a vibrant green, and small wildflowers were already appearing in places where, just hours before, there had only been cracked earth. "A miracle," Lucia murmured, marveling at the transformation. "A reminder," Sarah corrected softly, "that after the storm comes the calm, that life finds ways even in the most arid deserts." They resumed their journey with renewed energy. The storm, despite the momentary discomfort, had been a blessing. It cooled the air, making the walk more bearable. The streams, previously dry, now ran generously, offering fresh water to quench their thirst. After 2 more days of walking, the hills gave way to a flatter landscape, and finally they could see in the distance the outlines of Prayer Mountain, the sacred city built on the mountaintop crowned by the basilica, dedicated to the Archangel Michael. Sarah's heart quickened. She was so close now. Just 1 more day of walking, and she would reach the destination that had consumed her thoughts throughout the journey. Anticipation mixed with a strange melancholy. It was as if a part of her already missed the pilgrimage, the simplicity of having just one objective, to walk one step after another toward hope. "Look, other pilgrims," Lucia exclaimed, pointing to what looked like a caravan of people moving slowly in the same direction. As they approached, they realized there were dozens of the faithful, coming from different regions, all drawn by the news, the papal visit. There were entire families, elderly people leaning on canes, young people carrying banners and flags, religious in traditional habits. The diversity was impressive. Accents from all over the country mixed with foreign languages, creating a devotional Babel. Sarah and Lucia joined the group, immediately welcomed as sisters in faith. An old woman, noticing her advanced pregnancy, insisted Sarah use her walking stick for support. A young seminarian offered fresh water from his canteen. A family shared their homemade bread and cheese. That night, the last camp before reaching Prayer Mountain turned into an anticipated celebration. Someone brought a guitar, another a harmonica. Traditional songs of praise rose to the starry sky, while stories of faith and hope were exchanged around the campfires. An old pilgrim, his face as wrinkled and lined as the ancient trees on Sarah's farm, told his own story of a miraculous cure after a similar pilgrimage. "Decades ago, the doctors had given up on me. Cancer, they said. No possible cure." His voice, surprisingly strong for someone so old, captured everyone's attention. "I dragged myself to this same shrine, more dead than alive. The Pope at the time, it was good John Paul II, passed, far from me. There was no touch, no direct words, but in that moment I felt something inexplicable, a warmth that started in my chest and spread throughout my entire body." He paused dramatically, his eyes reflecting the flames of the campfire. 3 months later, I went back for new tests. The doctor couldn't believe what he saw. "Impossible," he said, checking and rechecking the results. The cancer had completely disappeared. That was 35 years ago, and here I am, back once more to give thanks. Stories like this fed Sarah's hope, but also sparked a silent doubt. Why did some receive miracles and others not? Was it a matter of worthiness, of need, of a divine purpose hidden from human eyes? Or was it simply chance dressed in the robes of faith to make the imponderable nature of existence bearable? These questions accompanied her as they finally reached the foot of the mountain where the sacred city stood. The climb was steep, a final physical challenge for the already exhausted pilgrims. For Sarah, with her advanced pregnancy, each step was a test of determination. Lucia, noticing her fatigue, linked her arm in hers, offering physical and emotional support. Together, Sarah, one step at a time, just as the journey has taught us. The city was unrecognizable. Normally a quiet place, although always with a steady flow of pilgrims, Prayer Mountain was overflowing with people. All the inns, hotels, and family homes offering lodging were full. Improvised tents occupied every available space in the squares and fields around the city. "Where are we going to stay?" Lucia asked, suddenly worried. Night was approaching, and the idea of sleeping outdoors wasn't appealing after so many days of journeying. For a moment, Sarah felt the weight of despair. She had come so far, faced so many challenges, only to now find herself without a place to rest, to recover her strength for the big day that was coming. The day the Pope would visit the shrine. It was then that a familiar voice called her name. Turning, she saw with astonishment the face of Anna, a childhood friend who had left Willow Creek years ago to marry a merchant in Prayer Mountain. "Sarah, is that really you? My goodness, you're pregnant, and you walked all this way?" Anna's eyes widened in a mixture of admiration and concern. "Come with me right now. You'll stay at our house." That night, settled in a real bed for the first time in nearly a week, Sarah felt the baby stir with renewed energy, as if he too was aware of the proximity of something important. "Feel this," she said to Anna, placing her friend's hand on her belly. "He's never been this active." Anna smiled, her eyes shining with held-back tears. Maybe he knows tomorrow he'll be in the presence of the Holy Father. The big day dawned with a clear sky and a gentle breeze, a gift from the heavens after the suffocating heat of the previous weeks. The streets of Prayer Mountain turned into rivers of people, all flowing in the same direction, toward the Basilica of St. Michael the Archangel, carved into the rock of the mountain. Sarah, Lucia, and Anna joined the crowd. Thanks to Anna's status as a local resident, they managed to get a spot reasonably close to the path the Pope would take before entering the basilica. The wait was long. Hours passed. The sun climbed high in the sky, and the heat, initially pleasant, became oppressive. Sarah felt a slight dizziness, then a stronger one. Her vision began to darken at the edges. The baby, previously so active, now seemed unsettlingly quiet. "Anna, I don't feel well," she whispered before her legs gave way. The crowd, too dense for her to fall completely, supported her in a sort of semi-collapse. Alarmed voices rose around her. "A pregnant woman has fainted. Make some room, she needs air." It was at that exact moment that the papal entourage turned the corner. The commotion drew the attention of the security detail, who immediately alerted the Pope's closest aide, who in turn whispered something in the Holy Father's ear. To everyone's astonishment, Pope Francis signaled for the procession to stop, going against all security protocols. He approached the crowd, moving toward the small commotion where Sarah was being supported by Lucia and Anna. A murmur of admiration and reverence spread through the crowd, which parted like the Red Sea before Moses. The Pope, with that gentle smile that had made him loved by believers and non-believers around the world, reached Sarah, who was now sitting on a chair improvised by someone in the crowd. "My daughter," he said in simple Italian, with his unmistakable Argentine accent. "Did you come from far away?" Sarah, still dizzy but now fully conscious of the extraordinary presence before her, could only stammer, "From Willow Creek, Holy Father." "On foot." The Pope's eyes widened slightly, revealing his surprise at such a demonstration of faith. "On foot? In this condition?" Then, without waiting for an answer, he did something that would be talked about for years throughout the region. He knelt down to her level, placed his hands on her prominent belly, and whispered a blessing in Latin. The moment lasted only a few seconds, but for Sarah, it felt as though time had stopped. She felt a strange warmth radiating from the spot where the pontiff's hands touched, her belly spreading through her entire body. And then, as if on cue, the baby gave a strong kick, so vigorous that the Pope himself felt it, and smiled, surprised. "He has strength, this little one. He'll be born healthy and strong, I'm sure," the Pope said, before making the sign of the cross on Sarah's forehead. Then, with the help of a security guard, he stood up and continued his way to the basilica, leaving behind an amazed crowd and a young woman in a state of shock. The following weeks passed like a hazy dream for Sarah. The return to Willow Creek was very different from the journey there, this time accepting offers of rides along the way, allowing herself the comfort she had previously denied as part of her sacrifice. Lucia decided to stay in Prayer Mountain, where Anna helped her find work in a guest house. "I'll come visit my parents soon," she promised Sarah as they said goodbye. "But first I need to discover who I am away from the hills." The news of her meeting with the Pope reached Willow Creek even before Sarah did. When she finally returned to the town, she was received like a local celebrity. The same people who had doubted her undertaking now wanted to hear every detail of the miraculous encounter. Father Thomas received her in the church with tears in his eyes. "God works in mysterious ways, my daughter. Your faith moved mountains." But the biggest surprise awaited on her small farm. What was once an orchard of trees nearly dead from the drought had been transformed. The trees, suddenly vigorous, were not only green but covered in small fruits that promised the best harvest in decades. "It's impossible," murmured Dr. Miller, who had come to visit her for a checkup after her long journey. "These trees were practically dead when you left, and the rain, although welcome, wouldn't have been enough for such a recovery." Sarah merely smiled, stroking her now even more prominent belly. "Maybe it's just the natural cycle of life, Doctor. Death and rebirth, despair and hope, always alternating like the seasons. The tests performed the following week in the nearest city surprised even the most skeptical doctors. The condition that had seemed to sentence her son to a brief and painful life, if any at all, had inexplicably improved. It wasn't completely cured. There would still be challenges ahead. But the prognosis was drastically more optimistic. "I can't explain it," admitted the specialist, studying the ultrasound images with a perplexed expression. "In all my years of practice, I've never seen such a spontaneous reversal of this type of condition." In her 8th month of pregnancy, a letter arrived from the Vatican. An anonymous benefactor, touched by Sarah's story, which had been published in a small regional newspaper, offered to fund an experimental treatment at a major city hospital that could further improve her baby's chances. The treatment was led by a doctor who, to her surprise, turned out to be the son of an old doctor from Willow Creek. My father always talked about that region, about the traditions, the simple but deep faith of the people. It was part of what inspired me to follow this path in medicine, to find points where science and faith can dialogue instead of opposing each other. During the weeks of treatment in the city, Sarah stayed in a convent run by nuns dedicated to St. Michael. The Mother Superior, a woman of quiet wisdom gained from decades of service to those most in need, became her confidant. "The real miracle, my daughter," the Mother Superior would say as they walked together through the convent gardens, "is not the instant cure, although God can certainly grant it when it is His will. The real miracle is the inner transformation, the journey of the soul that accompanies the body's search for healing." It was in these conversations that Sarah began to glimpse a broader purpose in everything she had lived through. It wasn't just about her son, about her personal faith, about an individual blessing received from the Pope. It was about community, about tradition and innovation, about building bridges between seemingly opposing worldviews. At the end of her 9th month, while the city was experiencing a gentle autumn rain, Sarah went into labor. On the same night, curiously, Willow Creek received the heaviest rain in years, officially ending the drought that had plagued the region for so long. The labor was long and difficult, but in the end, a strong and healthy cry echoed in the delivery room. Joseph Thomas Miller was born perfect, not with an inexplicable and complete cure of the diagnosed condition, but with a version so mild that the doctors predicted a normal life with only minor limitations. "It's a miracle of modern medicine," stated the doctor, proud of his team and the pioneering treatment. "It's a miracle of faith," countered the nun who had stayed with Sarah during the delivery, holding her hand through the most difficult moments. Sarah smiled at both of them, holding her son in her arms for the first time. Why not both? Why do we have to choose? When she finally returned to Willow Creek, her son in her arms, she was received as a symbol of renewed hope. Her small farm, with the trees now vibrant and heavy with fruit, became a local pilgrimage spot. People came from neighboring towns to see the miraculous orchard and hear the story of the woman who had made a pilgrimage to the Pope. A month after her return, another surprise arrived. A small package from the Vatican. A letter signed by Pope Francis's personal secretary accompanied an olive tree seedling, cultivated in the Vatican gardens, with soil brought from the Holy Land. "His Holiness remembers your meeting and sends this olive tree as a symbol of peace, hope, and renewal. May it grow strong like your son, and may both bear much fruit in your lives." Sarah planted the olive tree in a special spot, in the center of her orchard, where it would receive the best sunlight. In the years that followed, as she raised her son and managed her increasingly prosperous farm, that tree became the heart of something new and unexpected, a welcoming place for pregnant women in difficulty. Inspired by her own journey, Sarah transformed the family house into a refuge where tradition and modernity, faith and science, ancient wisdom and contemporary knowledge coexisted in harmony. Medicinal herbs cultivated according to the recipes of the town elders shared space with modern obstetrics manuals. Ancient prayers were recited in the same space where volunteer doctors offered prenatal care. "The miracle continues to multiply," commented Father Thomas, now well over 90 but still lucid and active in the community, as he watched little Joseph, healthy and full of energy, running among the trees. Like the loaves and fishes of the gospel, one faith feeds many lives. And so, a simple journey of faith transformed into a story that would be told for generations, not just as the account of a possible individual miracle, but as a testament to the strength that is born when personal courage, community traditions, scientific advancements, and deep faith intertwine, like the branches of an ancient tree, creating something stronger and more lasting than any of these elements could be alone. In every new crisis, droughts, illnesses, economic challenges, the inhabitants of Willow Creek and the surrounding area would recall Sarah's story, not as a magic formula for solving problems, but as a reminder that giving up is never the only option, that unexpected paths can open for those who have the courage to take the first step toward the unknown. And you, who now hear this story, perhaps you ask yourself, was it truly a miracle? Was it advanced medicine? Was it simply the natural cycle of life manifesting at its own mysterious pace? Or perhaps, just perhaps, it was the transformative power of the journey itself. The miles walked under the scorching sun, the hands extended in help along the way, the community that gathered around a shared hope. The answer, as Sarah discovered, lies not in choosing between one explanation or another, but in understanding that life's greatest miracles reside precisely in the spaces between our well-defined categories, in that sacred territory where heaven and earth meet, where the divine and the human converse in a language that transcends words, where the impossible and the possible dance together in the eternal choreography we call life.